How many of these have we done now?
This will be our 39th and 38th and 39th.
That's actually less than I would have expected.
Mm.
I feel like we've really done a lot of this, but maybe, but not in a weary way. Just in a, I feel like we've done it a lot.
We take breaks every now and then because of the research,
Sure,
but
sure.
Ultimately, we sometimes run 2 of these a month. I don't know. We got a lot of shows.
We do have a lot of shows. We do.
Has a lot of shows.
That's true. We do have a lot of shows.
Mm-hmm,
I think my favorite thing about this show is that I end up watching between 5 and 10 movies a month at least to get an idea. Aside from like stuff I want to watch, like it's also like that was kind of a hit movie that maybe I've never seen or I have seen but not for a long time. You know,
100%. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
I really
watch
like
more
that.
movies.
Yeah, exactly. Which I need reasons to do that actually, because it'd be easier for me to not do, like play video games or whatever the fuck else. You know.
Yeah. Just jack off. Just constantly.
You know how many hours of that I'd be doing if it wasn't for this show?
Like 18 hours a day,
easily.
Yeah.
I'd never be employable. This show keeps me employable, 100%.
Support Small Beans. It keeps Adam from jacking off.
Keep me from destroying myself with too much semen. By the way, I watched the fucking Bone Collector the other day. Just threw the Bone Collector in front of my eyes. Yeah,
that's amazing.
That's one.
Tell me about your experience. With the Bone Collector.
I couldn't because it did not capture me. It did not capture me at all.
Just completely dumbfounded by the movie. 2 hours of you just like, I can't take it. It's the Bone Collector.
He was aggressively neutral for me.
Yeah,
and I just didn't. It just didn't make an impression. You know, I was like, meh.
Man, song is old as time, man. I don't know how many neutral, or let's call them what they are, mediocre films.
Mediocre,
yeah. Like I watched too many. In the hopes of that we'd find something.
We'd find a gem
of wisdom.
Totally,
some kernel of wisdom to bring you to the show, which is
this show.
Directorpiece Theater, where we talk about directing.
We sure do.
Guess.
Yeah, we
and
do.
Movies.
Yeah.
Directors, they make movies. you get the gist.
This is the level of analysis we're bringing you here.
Yeah, I'm drawing the connections for y'all. I'm Abe Epperson, but this isn't my episode. Introduce yourself, persons whose it is.
Thank you. I am the person whose episode it is, Adam Ganser, co-host, friend extraordinaire of my dear Abe, who's beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the years of friendship that brought us to this point.
What are we talking about?
I don't know.
No, I mean to literally.
Oh, today?
You thought that your profession of heartfeldt camaraderie and brotherhood that I was just throwing it out? No, I was yes-anding.
I see.
Moving on because
That's
it's beautiful. And I didn't want to ruin it. And I did. All right.
You want to know, before I get into Thomas Crown Affair, which is the movie we're talking about, I just want you to know I have watched no less than 6 Julia Roberts movies, desperately hoping to find one that's like, we're going to get it. Today, it's going to be it's going to be my best friend's wedding, and we're going to fucking do it. And it never sticks, man.
Yeah.
Never sticks.
She is elusive with her bad
movies. She really is. Yeah.
And obvious with her very good ones. I'm not saying she's bad or picks bad movies. I'm just saying that everyone knows the good movies that she's been in.
It's true. And I feel like we forget how big of a deal she was our entire childhood.
Would you cover Aaron Brockovich in this?
It was up for Best Picture. It was up for Best Picture.
That's right.
And Best Director.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's good. It's a really good movie, you know?
No, yeah, it is.
It's a really good movie. No, I'm thinking for her, it's it's Notting Hill, or it's maybe even Pelican Brief.
American Sweethearts.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I don't like that movie, but yeah. Or Stepmom. Stepmom has some
Never
potential.
saw Stepmom. That one didn't get me.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm going to find a Julia Roberts movie one of these days.
You'll find one.
I'll find it. Yeah, of course I will. Anyway, but that's not today. Today we're talking about, I think, a fairly beloved movie. Thomas
I think
Crown
no
Affair.
one remembers this at all.
Oh,
past
interesting.
an age of, if you are 25 right now, this is not nonsense. This is
That's
a
fair.
nonsense movie.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. it's definitely time bound in a way. I feel like at the time though there was a lot of hype about it. Maybe because people love the original, I assume.
No, it was Pierce, baby.
Yeah, it was Pierce.
Brosnan,
Right.
Rene Russo,
Right.
doing art heists. You
Right.
go like, hell yeah.
Right. That's right.
Pierce Brosnan was on top of the world.
Yes, he was. Right off Goldeneye, he did this. Yes, and it was actually
Not right off.
It was. It was like his next project because it took him a few years to get it done, I think.
Like it released much later.
Yeah,
than
like
a shot kind of deal.
I think they were
par for the course
on
for
it.
McTiernan.
Yeah, I think he was working on it for like 4 or 5 years. I think.
Yeah, because GoldenEye's 95, and I believe this is
99.
99.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think Dante's Peak came out maybe before this, so maybe they're concurrent.
Yeah, Dante's Peak.
Yeah, that's another one that we could do one day. But the reason we're here is not explicitly to talk about Pierce Brosnan. It's actually to talk about John McTiernan, who I think it's safe to say is Abe's special boy. Right? He's a special boy for Abe.
He's one of them. I have so many special boys and
you
gals, but like, look.
But you love him.
There's something about John McTiernan's movies.
The
man created Die Hard. I'm saluting him right now. I am literally saluting.
As you should. I actually think, and this is sort of like how I wrote this outline that we're going off of today, but like, I think John McTiernan should be more of a household name than he is. Yeah. He is like the voice behind, I would say, 3 of the most important action franchises in cinema history. They were also, by the way, his first 3 motion pictures. He just kept hitting home runs.
Predator.
Yeah. If you don't include Nomad, which is a movie that he made, and like an indie thriller that kind of got him on the map, you know?
Fucking Nomad.
Yeah, Nomad.
No one cares.
Yeah. It does matter for this movie, actually, because Nomad stars Pierce Brosnan of Remington Steel.
Yes, it does.
Anyway, his first movie after that was Predator, which is like, wow. Yeah, what a announcement that, hey, I'm here, motherfuckers. His second movie was Die Hard. Yeah, unbelievable. And his third movie, you could argue, is kind of every bit as important as those other 2. It's The Hunt for Red October, which is the first of the Jack Ryan stories.
Oh, Jack Ryan, of course.
Yeah.
I totally separate those 2 in my brain.
I mean,
of course,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
That man, it's perfect. I love this. He is the most boomer.
He really is.
Fucking director. I mean, he is a boomer, but I mean, he is like Jack Ryan is of course that franchise he began because Jack Ryan is the most boomer shit I've ever seen.
Well, and it's also like looking up to the generation before the boomers, which is one of their chief characteristics. Like they revere their parents, which a trait our generation does not share. We'll put it that way.
They're not the greatest generation. You know,
that's right. That's exactly it. So I guess the point I wanted to make about sort of listing his first 3 films is like, that's better than almost every director's entire career. Any of those 3 movies is better than almost any director's entire career. Like if you made one of those, you're pretty much halfway to George Lucas or Peter Jackson. You know what I mean? Like, right?
Yeah. Well, I think Peter Jackson is
he's better.
Different category.
I agree.
But George Lucas, Howard the Duck much? He's got 2, baby. No, that's right. Like, because most people have one great execution or like a catalog of execution, but like one great idea, one thing to tie themselves to. And
he has 3.
And he's just like, bob and weave, baby. I'm just making hits.
Well, and it seems to me from just looking at his catalog, like I didn't get a strong sense of how he felt about his work in my research, but looking at his catalog, he seemed pretty resistant to like franchising stuff. Like he wasn't a part of Die Hard 2. He wasn't a part of any of the Predator sequels. He wasn't a part of like any of the Jack Ryan stuff. And he seemed to kind of only want to do original IPs, which, hey man, salute that. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think that's a true director. Like somebody who's like, I don't want to keep doing it. I want to make the one that I love and move on, you know? I think that's a director's sentiment that I think most directors, even like a James Gunn type, I think probably feels like that in his heart somewhere, you know, even though
I think that,
making money is good.
I think It's funny. I think Orson Welles said something similar because he just had a birthday before we recorded this, and there was a lot of people bringing up his old quotes because he's full of them. And he was talking about how, like, I don't know. I don't want to digress it too much, but a sense of ignorance is like how he really wants to approach a movie. Because if the second that you know too much about a topic, you are now too you become timid because you know of all the scaffolding at which is necessary to stand to be able to be respected in that particular field. And I get the feeling that McTiernan, like a lot of great directors, like Orson Welles as well, very jack of all trades kind of vibe.
I think so too. I think he also has kind of an accessible sensibility, which is a thing that we're going to come back to. That doesn't mean that he's
Hollywood.
No.
Studio.
It doesn't mean that he. It also doesn't mean that he's like a blue collar type guy. That's not what I mean by that. He's very artistic, but in ways that don't feel artistic. You know, like his artistry is very much sort of invisible to the audience's eye, I would say.
It's perfect. He's the perfect director.
Well, he's a perfect Abe director because Abe is famous. Abe is famous for saying at Cracked. We used to have this debate all the time. He would say, that a perfect director is transparent. You know, a person who makes movies where you don't sense that they are there. A thing that I've grown to appreciate as I've gotten older. But I also love me the Tarantinos of the world who are like, no, look at me, motherfucker. You know,
the loud assholes who make the world talk about them.
That's right.
You know? They guide the conversation.
The Edgar Wrights, if you will. And I appreciate those. Anyway, so McTiernan falls probably closer on the spectrum to transparent as a filmmaker, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But in 1999, McTiernan, believe it or not, even with all that success, was kind of on shaky ground, especially critically. Because he'd made 3 movies that just didn't perform. And when I list the movies, you'll be surprised that people felt this way about it. But they did. The first of them was Medicine Man, which was, I think still kind of an above average movie. It's fine. But it didn't perform very well. It was kind of panned by critics. Last Action Hero, which has become kind of a cult classic, was panned initially by critics. They really didn't like it, which I find very surprising. But it also didn't perform well in the box office, so he was maybe ahead of the audience at that point. And then I think
so, yeah.
I know, it's such a good movie, which is so weird.
I mean, it's actually not that. Here's my thought on Last Action Hero. It's not actually that great in terms of the meta conversation, but you look at the meta conversations we're having now, like Last Action Hero was way ahead of its time.
Yes, it was.
Like and it also would be a lot more playful and less reserved were it to be made now. You couldn't make Last Action Hero now only because like you'd have to update it to such an extent that it's just like we have multiverses. We have, fucking Marvel is doing like blows up their timeline every phase. So it's like the normal ad hoc movie where meta is being involved. Last Action Hero is barely touching the surface, but back then it was like, what the fuck are
way
we
ahead
watching?
Of its time. Absolutely. And I think that it's still a little bit notable in that it dares to integrate the like real Hollywood real life into the story, like, and dares to demand that you know things about real life Hollywood to understand the movie. And that's interesting. But hardly the first or last that's done that. But still, people kind of missed that one. And even, you'll be surprised to hear this probably, Die Hard with a Vengeance was not met well in terms of public opinion, even though it made a lot of money. People,
I don't think any Die Hard was Die Hard 2 even. I think that's what happens in franchises where like your first one is so undeniably classic.
But what are you going to do? Right. What are you going to do for a sequel?
I know that Temple of Doom, which was probably right, also got that guff, and Last Crusade also got that guff.
And for me, those are both much worse than Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, I think they are. I think the third one's pretty good.
With a Vengeance. Yeah. With a Vengeance is a really fun movie.
It is very fun. I like that movie. I don't love it, but I like it. It's definitely not Die Hard. I mean, Die Hard is a template from which all action movies spring. That's how good it is. But I think it says something that he even at that point went back to direct a Die Hard. You know, like I think he was already kind of feeling the pressure to make something successful. Because you get used to making hits, and then suddenly, the blessing wind departs, and you're like, oh no, now what? And that's kind of where he was in 1999. Mm-hmm. So he kind of, after Die Hard with a Vengeance, he basically took like 4 years off, and he made 2 projects, and you will laugh at what they both were. The first one is...
Well, I know one of them is this one.
Yeah, one of them is this one, which is in some ways not a very McTiernan idea, but we'll get to that. The other one is 13th Warrior, which...
hell yeah.
13th Warrior, which I think is fair to describe as A, a loose retelling of Beowulf, B, terrible, and C, a movie that does seem like McTiernan could make it. Like on paper, it's like, oh yeah, he could make that movie, right? That seems
What
right.
if I...
You gonna tell me it's good? Right, Are you gonna tell me it's good?
No, I remember when I was in college, I had a long conversation at a party. This is the kind of parties I went to where we talked 13th Warrior. So, real cool people that
very cool.
Single out in the crowd and go, that guy doesn't talk about 13th Warrior at a party. No, we did. And what if I asked the question, rewatch 13th Warrior?
It's been a while. I'll give you that.
All right.
Okay.
And conceive of it as McTiernan's love song to Ingmar Bergman.
Oh boy.
It completely rechanges everything because it's all about perspective, which we'll get into on my Directorpiece theater of 13th Warrior. I'll probably talk about it. That's like for you, because most people don't know Bergman.
I love Bergman,
but like, he was like always, fucking, peasants cutting potatoes and shit. Like, that's what he wanted to tell, this famous epic in a small stakes way, where it's just like there are invaders. That's all you know. Anyway,
I appreciate that. I appreciate creative readings of movies. Especially when
doesn't mean they're good.
Well, sometimes when we really missed it, it could mean that, but that's very unusual.
I do not think McTiernan is like, if you just think about Ingmar Bergman, you'll enjoy the movie 13th Warrior. Obviously, it's off the note.
Fair enough.
Because it is pretty terrible.
Well, we all have our passion projects, sort of doing the doing the Charlie Day string theory thing with 13th Warrior is pretty good. I think that the public, though, perceives that as not a great film. No. The other that he made is Thomas Crown Affair, and I think it's safe to say this is a movie that's really a love story that's sort of wrapped in a heist movie and not the other way around.
Yeah. Another movie that doesn't look like, is not what you think is promised, because you think
absolutely
fucking James Bond,
right?
Fucking art thief,
right?
Rene Russo is there trying to catch him. This is gonna be great.
Right. It seems you watch it very cat and mouse, and like there's gonna be action centerpieces and stuff, and it's not. It's a love story, and furthermore, and this is also interesting for McTiernan at this point, it's a remake of a movie that was fairly well known and somewhat beloved.
Much more clearly that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much aware of the previous film, which is 1968's Thomas Crown Affair with Steve McQueen, of course, who's such an icon. So I just think it's interesting that at this point in his career, these are the 2 films he tries to do. One of them is a very McTiernan-y premise, or at least one that fits his previous canon, and the other one isn't. And Thomas Crown Affair, the one that isn't, sort of ends up being, up to this point, McTiernan's last good film and kind of his artistic swan song. Unless he comes out of retirement and makes a movie, and let's all hope that he does, because, he's made a lot of great films.
You might be right about
I know, because after this, he made Rollerball in 2002, and he got into a bunch of legal trouble with Rollerball. He was like taping his producer, and...
It went real quick, yeah.
And then he went to jail.
And then it was Basic.
Yeah, and then hasn't made a motion pictures in 14 years. Yeah, he made Basic, which was horrible. And he hasn't made a movie in 15 years.
I mean, at that point, it was like, I think, I just want to make money from
because he had
institution. I know how to make money out of. That's why Rollerball and Basic are both like more high concept, and like, look at the Flash, everyone's into this bullshit, so let's do this bullshit. Which is lazy way of making movies. And shame on you.
I agree. Well, shame in the sense that it's not why you should make movies. It's a reason that you can that a lot of movies get made. So, like, and Lord knows if we're lucky enough to make movies, Abe, later in our lives we may end up facing these choices, and I don't want to condemn them too hard now.
I also think that he's probably old and he was just like, who gives a shit? And that's an affectation of becoming old.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. So, but interestingly, this film is sort of kind of his swan song. And despite how I sort of set it up as this weird left turn in his career that's sort of coming in the twilight, I think it's actually a really great vehicle to show what makes McTiernan such a great filmmaker.
Nice.
Because I think that this film shows in a broad way how a director's choices can affect the sensibility of a film and make it entertaining and engaging or not. And I think that McTiernan also knew that this film was memorable and meant something, because when he went to jail, he wrote a script for a sequel to this. So, and that was like 15 years later. So he clearly was passionate about this project and had some faith in it, and sees more story to tell here. Whether that movie will ever happen, who can say? I hope it does, just because, I still root for the guy not being invested in his crimes. But I do.
Yeah, I mean, what is Thomas Crown like as a character? He kind of represents in the zeitgeist. If you had everything, what do you really want?
That's exactly it. That's his dilemma as a person, is sort of like, what do you get the man who has everything?
Which deems numerous sequels. Not necessarily of this brand that's been covered in other movies, but like it's definitely what this movie is about. It asks, gun to your head, Thomas Crown.
Yeah, what's it about?
What do you want a fulfilling life, or do you want a life where you have fucking done everything? Well, it's like the Talented Mr. Ripley's and
that's
whatnot.
true.
God, these are all old films,
but they're all ancient, contemporary, which is partly why you remember them. You know what I mean? Like, they're all contemporaries of each other.
Yes,
and they were so well advertised, so like memorably advertised, that you remember the premise of them. I think that says something about, like, because frankly, the question that you put out there is what they would have advertised with. And yet it's not really the most important question of Thomas Crown Affair at all. And the movie knows that, by the way. This is so that question exists in the script, but it's definitely moved to one side. And you're going to see why in a second. So the first thing that we should say about John McTiernan in his role here on this film is he was the first choice of the people producing the film. It was mostly being driven by Pierce Brosnan, who, remember, as we said, is coming off of GoldenEye fame. And I guess Dante's Peak fame. So,
yeah, baby.
He's got two big hits, and he's James Bond, right? And James Bond gets at least 3 movies before we're done with him. You know what I mean? So he's riding very high. GoldenEye was a great film for James Bond. And he wanted McTiernan. That was his number one choice. McTiernan initially wasn't available. They tried a bunch of other directors, but as soon as McTiernan became available again, they were like, nope, it's got to be McTiernan. And I think that tells us a few things about McTiernan. One is that his actors like him. And in fact, a lot of his jobs came from actors. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger purposefully picked him out based on his work in Nomads for Predator. So he seems to not be like a total prick to work with, despite his later crimes.
Watch him in Interview. I know you think of directors in Interview, you can think of like how the reservedness of Christopher Nolan, or the, kind of trolling of David Fincher, or the bombastic aspect of Quentin Tarantino. McTiernan is just fucking real.
Yeah.
He just cuts right to the core. Yes. And I think a lot of people, especially actors whose job is to mimic life, that really appeals to him. And so he's like an actor's director, I think.
And that's a great observation, because I would say that quality carries in his decision making here too, like his sort of dogged reality, you know what I mean? And I don't mean that, like, I guess authenticity is maybe a better word. He's very authentic. But it's worth saying that, again, even if Pierce Brosnan liked working with this guy, when you're James Bond and you have a project like this, you can pick who you want to direct it. And it's not like John McTiernan's the only guy in town. He could have had his pick of literally anybody. He could have picked the guy who did GoldenEye, who was also successful at the time, or any number of other directors. I just think that says a lot about McTiernan's talent that Pierce Brosnan wanted to work with him again. And McTiernan, when he joined, had a few conditions, and you're going to be fascinated by what they are. The first is he had to change the script, and he made several very substantial changes. Here's the first one, and I think it's the most important. He took the heist, which was written, from what I understand, was written to sort of be similar to the original Thomas Crown Affair heist, with where he hires some gunmen to hold up a bank. And he's like,
yeah, it's just a generic
it's a bank heist.
Robbery.
And he's like, no, we're not doing that. He will never use a weapon, and he's going to steal art, not money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that choice tells you right away how much better McTiernan understood this project than a lot of directors probably would have.
It's kind of an improvement on the original, to be honest, who is more of just like someone who's moonlighting as a criminal because they have everything. This is a man who specifically does it in circles of refined taste because he kind of hates that system. He loathes
that's right.
rich people.
That's correct. A thing that we're going to come back to several times. You said it so perfectly. He doesn't really like rich life. He doesn't like the isolation of rich life. And he doesn't see it as an institution to be honored or participated in, but one to be sort of like flouted. Because as a character says later in the film, he's stealing something that's basically only valuable to a couple of rich people. And that line is literally in the movie, and I think that tells you how McTiernan...
You're going to talk about the golf sequence, aren't you?
Yes, that's what the hell else we got to do.
Metaphor. It's a little metaphor.
Well, he's got there's so many in this movie. Like, they're very painstaking in how they set him up. But that choice, I know it sounds like, kind of obvious. I don't know if it is that obvious. There's a lot of directors who would have got swept up in showing the rich life, because there's a lot of that in the script. And McTiernan understood immediately, like, that's going to kill this movie. It will never be fun if this guy is stealing from actual people. He's got to be stealing from somebody who doesn't matter.
These are fine houses. He's just living in it.
Right.
The feeling of ownership is beyond him because he's so fucking rich. He's like, whatever. This is just where I want to go.
Yes. Now, as part of that heist, he sort of reconceived how the first piece of art is stolen. And part of that was that he wrote in this Trojan horse concept with the hired guns.
Yeah, that's pretty on the nose.
It's amazing. And of course the thermal cameras and stuff. So it's like, look, he is John McTiernan. He's still doing John McTiernan.
The thermal cameras. Yeah. He's got to have those thermal cameras, baby.
He's still doing a McTiernan joint here. Let's be honest.
Down Periscope.
Yeah. How did that line not make it? Exactly. So he's adding some stuff that's very much of his wheelhouse. But I think the story decision here, very smart. Now, another thing that he added is that there was a polo match that was written into the script that was again a repetition of what was in the original. Like, they apparently had a polo match in this movie, which I've only seen once years and years ago, so I don't totally remember it. But he replaced that sequence with a catamaran race. And that had two sort of really smart advantages. One is that the catamaran race is really breathtaking.
It's pretty.
It's pretty, but it's very intense. It's not intense like thrill ride intense. It's intense like, my God, like,
I mean, he's basically doing like an ollie.
Yeah, and it's so cool because that decision, I think, heightens thematically how bored Thomas Crown really is. You know what I mean? So like that is a better thematically for what this story's about, like you said. And also it was a decision that allowed Pierce Brosnan to do his own stunts. Because he was able to. Yeah, and so like this is a director who that's an intensely practical decision, but it really enhanced the film in every way, thematically, narratively, and visually. That one choice. And those kind of things often just sort of go by unnoticed by the movie public because they don't know who made what decision.
Is Pierce Brosnan like good at boats?
I guess.
Is he
I guess.
I mean, he's doing it.
I'm guessing that he must have known that Pierce Brosnan, that was a hobby of his. Okay. I'm sure that was part of what motivated it. And I think so again, as every director must do, he's kind of using the resources he has. He has Pierce Brosnan, and he has Pierce Brosnan's ability to navigate a boat. And
dude,
he did that.
Yeah. No. I love how you're connecting dots, but I just want to point out this is exactly what I mean when I say boomer ass movie.
Totally.
Because it's like these rich ass motherfuckers talking about like, woe is me. These are the complexities of being rich.
100%.
That's kind of what it's about, But
yeah.
Continue. I don't mean to take that. Like, that doesn't mean that these aren't legit. They are. It does mean that they're not super legitimate, but it doesn't mean that they aren't well thought out and connect the dots very beautifully in a way that we don't see typically.
It's a good choice for the director of this movie to make. I agree that, if you take 3 steps back and put this movie in 2022, like, this man gets guillotined quickly. Right? Like, so we wouldn't have anywhere near the patience for what he is in this time, and that's why this movie doesn't exist, like, wouldn't get made right now. But
richest man just bought Twitter. No one's getting guillotined.
Fair enough, but
they should.
But we wouldn't root for him.
They should.
I think is
we
wouldn't root for him.
Yeah.
But again, I think
we wouldn't care for this movie.
That's right.
Although we love Batman's,
That's because
don't get me started. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
No, there is a what do we need from a rich guy to like him in a movie conversation. That's a completely valid conversation for a director to have, because they have to figure that shit out all the time. I think McTiernan was a little ahead of his time. And by his time, I mean that era, by understanding, let's not make it really cool how rich he is and do the Entourage version of this guy.
That's kind of true.
Let's do a version where he's a thrill seeker because he's bored. And I think that's a more relatable problem.
Yeah.
So I think the net result of this, again, and this stuff all translates in our lizard brain in a way that, he eliminates obstacles to like his character, because Thomas Crown never puts somebody innocent in danger. That's important. And number 2, in his heists and stuff, like, if you want to talk about how he runs his business, okay, sure. But that's not really the scope of the movie. Right. He's not really even stealing anything. He's doing harmless, weaponless art borrows. Like, that's what he's doing.
Yeah, I got away with it.
Right.
It's Ocean's 11 kind of talked about this as well.
Right.
Like, there's or Ocean's 12 or whatever. The whole idea of just like the thrill of the steal.
Right. That's the fun of it.
I assume people who are really good at burgling would have that. I assume.
If they are like cat burglars style people, like, he has to be, like, think of the shape he's got to be in to do this. I think it is about him laughing at his desk with a glass of wine, being like, I got it. That really is what it is. Which is why he returned it a week and a half later. Before anybody was even on to him. It's like, okay, I stole it, now I'm putting it back, and it's fun for me to play around with society's rules. That's the whole idea, right? Which at the end of the day, when you realize what he did, it's like, how big of a deal is what he did, really? Not that big of a deal. That's what McTiernan wants us to think, and I think he's mostly successful with that. Now, to further ground this, McTiernan casts, and we'll talk about his casting explicitly, but casts and creates a plethora of what we'll call regular folk to be constantly assessing Thomas Crown's likability / approachability. Right? So, like, think of, like, the character of Bobby McKinley in the museum, right? Who Thomas Crown, like, has a conversation with him. He's like, you don't want to see the Monet? Do you know what that's worth, sir? Like, that whole conversation. Yeah. And I think the point of it is to say,
they're very nice.
Yeah. Well, he's a nice guy, and also regular people feel comfortable with him.
He puts in time and has things that feel like authentic wants.
Right. He shows up with a croissant and eats it, sitting on a bench with a guy who feels like, I can come up and talk to Mr. Crown. He's a normal guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's harmless. And they feel like pals. Even if there is a sense of their difference in walk of life, but I think when a regular guy feels at home with a rich guy in a movie, you think, oh, this rich guy's not so bad. Like, that's the net value of that. And I think that was very intentional. There's a reason why, for instance, he's an older, sort of grizzled type dude who may not really actually work in a museum, because I think it makes him feel more approachable. So also that line we talked about, how Thomas Crown is only stealing something that's valuable to rich people. That line is put in the mouth of Dennis Leary, who's clearly only there to represent blue-collar guy. You know, that's his job.
Demolition Man's Dennis Leary.
You love that movie so much.
Yeah.
You love it. No, but like, isn't that his job? And like, he has that great sequence with Rene Rousseau where he's like, "You like pizza? You want some pizza?" And she gives him this little smirk, like, "You're not going to invite me to pizza, right?"
That's right. And
he's like, "Oh, you're not a pizza person, huh?"
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to digress too far because you're doing so fucking well, but there's something that, there's a larger thing I want to talk about a little bit about. Like, do you know how, like, John McTiernan has this, like, he brought essentially what Die Hard is a French New Wave action movie.
Yes.
Right? And you can make an argument for that.
See it.
And that's why he hired Jan de Bont. Like, there's a lot of pressure on the aesthetics of European style cinema of the time, particularly the 60s and 70s. Maybe some 50s, but like, he really wanted to push the agenda of like, I want to talk about, like, when you're talking about authenticity, you're talking about regular folk, right? When you think of Jean-Luc Godard and all this nonsense, like from French New Wave.
Yeah, that's right.
That is also the context of what they want. And literally this movie chooses to do
That's
that.
right.
All of the art is poor people art.
Yes, it is.
And it's usually like made by poor people at the time. Like that big sequence at the end where he's got the bowler hat, he's literally the spitting image of Magritte's
That's
painting.
right, on purpose, of course. Yeah,
the Son of Man, you know, the one with the apple,
the one that's in the movie. Familiar. He literally walks by it several times.
Yeah, he's literally walks by it and is like, "Oh, that's me." And that whole point is that, like, the one thing that you want to see is hidden, right? And it's hidden by something that was placed there by God, basically. Right. The apple, you know, like, it's so you can't see the face of the person, you can't see what it is. So it's also it's about the elusiveness of humanity, that painting, I think. But it's also like about like who people are deep down, but also gives you this feeling that like I can see everything and I still don't know. Which is
a perfect metaphor.
To me, that's what Thomas Exactly. So I do think that there is a lot, like, I'm glad you picked it up on it. It's especially important, I think, to John McTiernan's art that he does have these kinds of references, because what they do is they're shorthand for him to understand exactly what he's doing.
That's what a great addition.
To understand the character of Thomas Crown.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think that's what
it's the exact opposite way you would approach this movie if you're interested in telling the story of a rich person.
Exactly. If you're hung up on the details and you're like, he uses this cool stuff and he's got a batarang, you know, you know, like, you love it. If you're really, which is not to say that that's bad at all. I'm think just saying that
a great contrast to this is some of the HBO shows of the time, or like a few years later, that are very glam focused, like Entourage or even Sex and the City, where like it's about showing like she's wearing Manolo Blahniks. You know, they're really in really in the Museum of Modern Art.
Look at the status that this item gives
because
us.
That's a thing that was really present in the late 90s, early 2000s in cinema. You know, and McTiernan didn't want to do that.
American pastime.
Yeah, he didn't want to do that, and he really worked hard, both in his influences and in his casting and everything else, to eradicate that. And I think that's really interesting. Just to further what you said here, there's a lot of visual stuff that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but even the robbery sequence itself is a bunch of blue collar guys, and we just sort of see it through only the lens of blue collar guys, through like delivery truck people, and then like the guy who runs the security camera, and then the four guys who break in are sort of like, you know, workman criminals and stuff. And the way we see Thomas Crown is largely walking amongst those people. You know, like that's the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's sort of him walking through, you know, everyday life. He doesn't like take a chauffeur to get to this spot. He gets out of that car and walks to the art museum.
It's like Henry V. Is that it? Is the Henry V? I forget which Shakespeare it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, I'm gonna go let me walk
among the
amongst
people. It might be
and understand.
I haven't read that play in a long time, so I don't remember.
Or like Sullivan's Travels,
Yeah.
you know, is another one example. You know, it's like it's a very a trope where some king of some kind says, "I would like to understand what it means to be real."
Absolutely, and I think Thomas Crown obviously gets a kind of pleasure from being anonymous as a rich guy. I think that's also what's being said there. But like, as a director, it's very like just this is simple lizard brain stuff. But when you see your character walking among all the rest of the people who are of a certain class or a certain personality type, you start to think they're either a contrast or an assimilation. And I think in Thomas Crown's case, it's an assimilation. You know, he seems like he can blend in with these people, which, by the way, also telegraphs the ending, a thing we're going to talk about a little bit.
That's Pierce Brosnan for you.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%, right? So now let's talk a little bit about the casting decisions. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't tell you that I know for sure the mechanics of how these decisions get made, but I can tell you what they mean. And I think that it's safe to say a director basically has to give a green light to a casting decision. You know, even if the studio has sort of an override. So forgive me if I can't say exactly who decided what, but we're going to assume that McTiernan had yes or no power over some of these choices. Mm-hmm. And that they actually come from him because they seem consistent with his aesthetic. So I think I'm choosing to believe that. So Pierce Brosnan, obviously there is no better person to play Thomas Crown in 1999 than Pierce Brosnan. Like, who else could you get?
Yeah,
he's perfect. He's James Bond.
Yeah,
and also it's kind of his movie, so that's not a decision that John McTiernan gets to make. But even if he did, he wouldn't choose anybody else.
At least someone knows what's up.
Yeah.
Someone's very aware of who Pierce Brosnan is, and it's probably Pierce Brosnan, to be honest.
Well, yeah, my understanding was that he was kind of driving this, so I assume that he's attached to the project and therefore gets a yay or nay on the big decisions. But even if McTiernan had started this from the ground up, Pierce Brosnan's still the perfect person for this role. Right. You know, so that's just a smart decision. A+ for recognizing that. Now, Rene Russo, I think it's fair to say, is a very surprising choice for this role.
Interesting.
And I'm gonna go into some reasons why. There will always be the possibility of pushing back and saying, but she's an attractive, famous actress, and I'm gonna say that's absolutely true.
That's true.
But I want us to think.
But caveat, understood.
I want us to think about who she really is. Okay, so first of all, she's age appropriate for Pierce Brosnan. Mm-hmm. That already, very surprising decision. Because she does not have to be. She could easily be a young woman in her 30s who's just a hotshot, like any other movie you've ever seen.
James Bond.
Right. And the fact...
Or any other movie.
I mean, how many movies have you seen where they're the same age? That like doesn't really happen in movies, right? It's an older guy and a younger woman. That's, the dumb thing about movies. And unless it's like, intentionally counteracting that. This movie's doing neither of those things. This movie is actually bringing with it the same problems that a person her age, which is early 40s, would have into the narrative, right? So because she's age appropriate, her calculus is very different, right? She's not some young up and coming person who's being like swept up by the majesty of Thomas Crown.
Right. She's over it.
She already knows. She sees him for who he is, right? She's not even Anna Kendrick with George Clooney on Up in the Air. Not even that, right? She's a person who's middle-aged and has built a life for herself. And that life has meant having to sacrifice companionship. And now into her life comes the promise of everything she ever wanted as in a companion. But she's also worldly wise enough to know Thomas Crown is trouble.
Right, yeah. And for people who haven't rewatched it in the seconds that it took you to click on this, the main conflict between the two of them seems to stem from the idea of, is this authentic?
Is this for real?
Is there some
real?
Other agenda? Or is your stealing shit? Is the fact that I'm like a insurance cop, or whatever she is, like, is this going to get in the way of us being able to actually enjoy this thing that we share, which is our, like romantic entanglement?
I mean, a very simplified way of saying it, is it me or the painting that he wants?
Yeah, exactly. And it cuts both ways, because is it me or the case that you want?
Exactly.
So they kind of have to sniff each other out, and that's
what the movie is.
The main function of Act 3, and why I think you're right about all these choices about like Rene Russo and updating the character a bit so that it's like a little bit more like I'm over it.
I mean, it's a great choice.
Very helpful.
It's a great choice. It makes the problems more adult, less immature, and therefore less reverent of the wealth. Mm-hmm. The wealth kind of gets pushed aside for the question of, yeah, but are you real? That's the real question she's asking. Now, the other point I want to make about Rene Russo is this is a way out of type role for her. Way out of type. Mm-hmm. She has been playing girl next door, cop wife, or tomboyish love interest her entire career up to this point.
In like the 80s, by the 80s.
And in the 90s. In The Line of Fire is in the 90s. She plays a Secret Service agent, Lethal Weapon 3. She's an internal affairs investigator. She's a cop's wife in many movies. Now, those of you who are like big Russo-philes, will point out, but wait a minute, she was a model before she was a movie star. That is correct. Here is a summary of her modeling career from Vogue that was written in 2016 in an interview with her that I thought was very germane. In the 1970s, Russo stood for sexiness that was both accessible and aspirational. She could vamp it up with the best of them, posing for Francesco Scavulo in decadent furs or swathed in Versace for Richard Avedon. I don't know. But Russo wasn't your average pinup. The poise she brought to her images made her the first choice for editorial shoots that demanded models with tenacity. Whether she was bound for the boardroom in a power suit or posing on a beach with Tony Spinelli. So I
just all the name dropping.
It's so dumb. Yeah, it's like, okay.
That's a nonsense.
Well, I think the words that stand out is, this is not your typical sexy object of desire. This is a person who we hope we could be. We feel she's accessible. We feel like we know her. We feel like we could be her.
Yeah.
Which is to say, she's not Angelina Jolie's character in every movie, right?
She's not Tiffany's.
Correct.
She's not the...
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. So suddenly, in this movie, Thomas Crown Affair, McTiernan kind of has her playing everything that she isn't in movies up to this point. She's like a jet-setting art expert who, yes, is an investigator, but really, seems to be in the art world for money and for, passion and for, all the reasons that are not what she's been playing up to this point. So now you may say, Abe, or listening objector, but isn't this a merging of all her identities, Adam? Isn't this the perfect merger of all the things she's been? And I'm going to offer you an alternative read. I think that Russo was cast because she feels out of her element in this role. I think that's the choice that's being made here. She's intentionally out of her element because it makes her more vulnerable and outmatched by Thomas Crown in The Affair.
I mean, yeah.
And that is not a thing the movie is shy about pointing out. It points it out all the time. It makes her...
But that...
I'm ready.
The thing. The wheatgrass sunglasses scene with the cops, is that not a reversal of that exact trope?
Well, I'm so glad you said that.
It's like saying she is relatable, she's so out of touch, she had a party last night or something which is unapproachable, but she's still got problems like the rest of us, right?
Then they go in and do the backstory investigation on her. I'm so sorry for what must have been a hell cycle that came rolling through my soundscape. Anyway, the next scene, or maybe the same scene where we get the wheatgrass thing, like the green soup that she drinks every day. They give us backstory exposition, and they're careful to describe her as actually a girl from the Midwest. Right? That's who she really is. Her dad's from Ohio. That's who she really is, and she's like become this art person, but in her core, she's a Midwestern girl.
In her core, she is how Russo was.
That's correct. They want us to make this association, and I think it's for the unconscious part of us that thinks, yes, she's an art world person, but she's not one of these inaccessible art weirdos. She's a person we know, we can relate to it, and we know that she's vulnerable in this world because Thomas Crown is not that guy. Right?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that you get the feeling that Thomas Crown is
older money.
So she's definitely got it ups the stakes on the
absolutely
fear of the main conflict, because she's like, but I mean, he could just be yet another one of these pieces of shit who's just into the myth of themselves.
It could just be another narcissist. You know, he could just be another one. And we know what those guys are like. We've always known what those guys are like. But I would say, again, McTiernan understood the movie he's making, because her vulnerability is the fulcrum on which the entire story pivots, right? Like, it's all based on, does she believe him or not? And the fact that she falls for him actually makes him more likable, because we trust her, right? Like,
yeah. And we don't see any reason why we shouldn't trust him.
If this woman can love him, a woman we feel like we know and can trust, then we can love him and trust him. So, like, McTiernan's doing, like, I think really smart empathy math here.
What if in Act 3 they just had a sequence where it's just like cuts to flashback of Thomas Crown doing all this malicious shit to her, and it's just like,
yeah, exactly, just cackling like evil Pierce, just mustache grows.
Pierce Brosnan. You can just see it. He's famous for his cackling.
He does have like a funny laugh when he plays like a comedy side character. He does have kind of a chuffing thing he does that makes me laugh.
Because he always plays up his own ass narcissist.
He does.
That's always what he plays.
But I have to say, even as James Bond, Pierce Brosnan was always kind of winking at us. You know, like, he's never seemed...
Yeah, I mean, it's comedy version.
Well, James Bond's kind of always comedy version. He's never seemed remote.
I'm thinking Miss Doubtfire.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
there
what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, he is the asshole in that movie. That's true.
But I mean, it's like, that's why it's winking at the same time. Because it's like, yeah, I'm playing a role. I'm being an idiot. I'm being a fool.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan has always been very likable, which is funny because he's literally a portrait of everything that everybody envies and hates in this world, and yet he's very likable. Exactly. So
that's acting, baby.
I mean, it's also that effervescent thing that makes a person unique. You know, like
the bitches.
Yeah, but like, I couldn't make Thomas Hardy that. Like, no matter what I did, I couldn't, with the camera, make Thomas Hardy into that. You know?
Well, I'll tell you to believe in yourself. But yeah, continue.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the kindness there. Just one last note on the casting. There's really not that many super rich people in this movie. And when they are there, they're often made very ridiculous, like the art museum curator who has the gigantic glasses. Or they're old, you know? So, like, McTiernan is constantly placing sort of what you might call New York faces in this movie. You know, just everywhere. There's, like, the museum staff, the guys doing the deliveries, you know? And I think intentionally, there's a lot of little tiny speaking parts that Thomas Crown sort of, like, you know, has a good relationship with, right? He walks into his office, there's, like, 6 speaking roles in there, and they're all everymen. And it's just to prove...
He does fuck over a few technical everymen, which is the criminals.
He does.
At the beginning,
that's true.
Who, like,
yes.
But I guess it's that 90s kind of the sentimentality of like, yeah, but they were
robbers.
Anyway.
Exactly.
But really, what do we know about it? It's more that they're just foreign. Totally. You know, but you know, they are robbers for hire. So I guess that, you know, if there is anyone in this movie,
also I think he's sort of taken our Eastern European prejudice against us here, right?
Yep, that's exactly
which is a thing that, you know, movies have been doing forever. Yeah. So I think we made this point.
James Bond,
100%. I think I made this point. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I don't need to spend forever on this, but I want to talk about how McTiernan is intentionally telegraphing the end of this film as much as he can without giving it away for the purpose of, I think, number one, just because it's artistic storytelling, but I think number two, because again, it's about relatability and sort of undermining our prejudices against Thomas Crown and sort of vindicating him in the end. And by the way, the ending is quite good. The last act of this movie, I think, is quite good. I really enjoy it. It might be a little silly, but it's the 90s, baby. Come on.
Dude, I have my hand on my cheek and I'm smiling. Like, I love it.
Great.
Tell me about it.
The first way that McTiernan does that, opening credits. A thing that we never really see, but in the opening credits, we have a constant switching of letters, right? Over black with sort of this moving drape-looking thing at the bottom and top of the frame, and it's cross-faded with Thomas Crown talking about, could a woman trust me? Right?
To Faye fucking
right,
Dunaway.
To Faye Dunaway, who's, by the way, a nod to the original, because she was the Rene Russo in the original.
She was the Russo.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, the switching of letters, of course, tells us what's going to happen at the end. He's going to switch the paintings, right? Like, right? And the crossfading tells us what is the actual meaning of it. It's a proof for the woman that is going to question whether she can trust him. So, it's John McTiernan, baby. he's doing it.
Yeah, he's got to do something. He's like, it doesn't have enough shit going on.
It's not the subtlest, but it's definitely, in hindsight, like a very clear telegraph. It's trying. I also think the vignetting that he does is interesting because he could be just cutting.
Yeah. I wondered if you thought.
I read that as it has it sort of suggests a theatricality.
Yeah, proscenium kind of like presentation.
Right, it's almost like it's a monologue being done on a stage, meaning, and I think that's to both undermine what he's saying and also to sort of heighten the question that's being presented. Like, oh, this is the theme, right? This is like Hamlet's monologue here, right? And also,
right, yeah.
It also, I think, foreshadows the performance that he will do during the heist. Right at the end,
two households, both alike in dignity.
Exactly.
In fair
exactly. It is totally that. But the way he restores the painting, the way he switches it back, is very performative. Right? Like, there's so many ways that a person could plan to do that wouldn't involve an elaborate staged proof that's very theatrical. But that's not Thomas Crown, baby. He wants to do it in plain sight, and I think that McTiernan's sort of telegraphing that just in the format of his introduction. And I think that's pretty cool. I didn't go into an excessive amount of details here because I didn't want this episode to be like 5 hours.
It's not that flashy. It kind of lets you sit again.
Yeah, but
it's because this is his love song. It's like him just going like, I want to talk about the art world because that's what like the French.
But it's not lore. Like it's not buried in the background. It's definitely foregrounded. It's just that the meaning of it is just out of reach. And that's my favorite way that a director can do this kind of work is it's there if you want to see it.
Hints of it. And like, I'm not going to make it a big deal. Yeah, I have that tendency because I like it so much that I'll just go straight for it. Like
it's hard not to.
Yeah, but like he's so good at like keeping his hand at like, I know that the whole point is that I'm doing these shots that have the composition of a French New Wave film on top of a museum. So now you're immediately thinking of all these specific films like Antonioni stylistic films.
Well, you are,
like that.
But sure.
I am, but like he's like, who gives a shit? And that's the right thought. That's I'm gonna make a movie for people. I'm not gonna.
He knows them enough to make them to incorporate them, but also to make them disposable, which is great.
Which is another nod to the dispelling of narcissism.
Agreed.
He's a very non-narcissistic director because he knows all that shit. It engages him, but he refuses to let it seep into his movie. It's the same argument that I made that's why Die Hard is a French New Wave film.
You should just do that.
What
you need to do that director piece. You just need to do that as a director piece so that everybody can hear it. I think it'd be really good. Anyway, just to finish up this point here. So I want to talk a little bit about his camera moves because it wouldn't be director piece if we didn't talk about camera moves. The number of pan reveals in this movie is uncountable. It's uncountable.
It's almost entirely
so many pan and reveals. Even like sometimes the camera moves, sometimes it's just literally panning over suddenly in a way that could be like an Arrested Development joke. So oftentimes just to define what a pan reveal is for the audience. So what we're talking about is that the camera is sort of dollying one direction, right? Like we're moving one way. Let's say it's left. We're sort of dollying left. And then suddenly we will pan right to a thing we didn't expect to see. And then over here, this, it's a thing he does all the time. And it's a thing that your lizard brain instantly understands. Oh yeah, so we're gonna have surprise reveals in this movie.
It's urgency.
Yeah.
Die Hard does it. It's
yeah,
like,
look at this thing,
that.
right? It's very sudden and dramatic. I think Spielberg also is very good at it, but in a less dramatic way.
I was going to say Spielberg does it. He does it. Yeah, he does it more of just motivations for. And now the scene is going to be taken over by this person.
Yeah, he is a little bit more artful about letting a subject lead us to a pan reveal. Like, to give you an example, if anybody wants to just take a moment and go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and watch the chase with the natives, which is one of my favorite things to use in film school. There's a bunch of repeated shots, but one of them that's one of my favorite is Indiana Jones runs through the woods, then past an old statue, and then we cut to the same exact frame with the natives right behind him.
That's right.
And as they pass the statue, bats fly out of its mouth, and this very chase. It's so good. Spielberg's really good at that.
Yeah.
And it's very fun and schmaltzy. Anyway, so the purpose of incorporating this into the movie, aside from McTiernan just liking it, because he does, is again to sort of in the language of the grammar of the camera to telegraph the ending. That again, there's going to be a sudden reveal. He's going to restore this painting and take this other one you didn't expect.
Yeah, as an item, that's what the pan reveal exists on, is and
exactly
a twist.
Right.
Yeah.
I also just kind of wanted to say McTiernan is unique in that he doesn't use motion to create a constant rhythm like so many filmmakers do.
I disagree.
What's that?
I 100%
really
disagree.
I think in this movie I didn't feel that as much.
Well, maybe not less in this movie, but there's literally, I could pull up on YouTube a quote of him saying sympathetic Dolly motions and trying
but not in this movie, right?
Die Hard.
I just mean in this movie.
I don't. It's just a
okay.
sentiment.
I just mean in this movie.
Okay. I'm trying to think of this movie. I'd have to watch it again with.
He's a little more careful to. I think his moves are a little more purposeful than the moves of, say, Christopher Nolan or Zack Snyder.
They are like on a meter.
They are creating the rhythm of the film with their motion, and I don't think McTiernan is not doing that. McTiernan,
and it's usually so fucking slow.
it is a little slow. I agree. McTiernan is using motion more in a storytelling way. It's for reveals for the most part. Sometimes it's by what I might call like lateral reframes. Like there's great question. So like an example of that is. He gets out of the car in the first scene, right? He gets out of the car and he's running to the museum, and we're dollying around him, and then we get all the way across him when whoop, he almost gets hit by a truck. And it's sort of reframing so that we see the truck coming, which we wouldn't have otherwise. Another example is like we watch a reflection of Pierce Brosnan in a glass wall, and we dolly with him, and then as we turn the corner, we meet two guys who are like, "Who do you think you are?" The guy who owns the building.
Right. It's almost like he's preemptively telling you, "All right, here's some context for the second frame or the second composition, so you are ahead of them." It's like dramatic irony as a visual motif.
And often what happens here is that it's sort of allowing us to see a thing that mattered in the background that the foreground was obscuring. In fact, a lot of times when we see Rene Rousseau and doing her cop stuff, especially when we first meet her, that's what happens. It's like we see the detectives and then we kind of dolly over and, oh, then that woman's over here. What's her deal? Right. And again, I would say that's sort of a subtle way of telegraphing the crime that Thomas Crown is doing, right?
Right. It's a form of distraction to be like, and look at this other thing, which won't play into anything until later.
Correct.
Let's move on.
So I don't mean to say that McTiernan doesn't use motion for the sake of getting us into a rhythm generally. But in this movie, it seemed very purposeful. So
right. It seemed like a theme.
Yeah, it's thematically driven,
choice.
which I really personally appreciate. I like that in film. He also uses lateral dolly moves, meaning side-to-side dolly moves, to like catch somebody mid-motion, which is like Spielberg's favorite thing in the world to do. It's sort of like the camera was looking at one thing and then the protagonist crosses into frame and sort of grabs the point of view of the camera. Sort of almost like we were gonna see something important in this thing, but then the protagonist came and changed it. And I don't mean to say that means it's distracting. It just sort of says that the moves themselves are motivated, meaning that something in frame causes the motion of it, but they're also thematically driven and sort of telegraph the meaning of the story.
Right. That telescoping from writing to visual is like, there's nothing else. That's why I like movies personally.
That's what a directing is.
Like when they nail that shit, you go, oh, that shit.
And that's what directing is. And again, I think that, I think McTiernan trying to translate the ending the way that he does in the film grammar is another way of him constantly sort of vindicating his main character. Although I would say his main character is actually Rene Rousseau, but sort of vindicating the person who's being examined here, which is Thomas Crown. I think telegraphing the end is his way of softening the blow of the accusations that we're leveling at him as the film watchers. Because I think he understood Thomas Crown has to be a person we like. He has to be. Because if he isn't a person we like...
I mean, he is a bit of a sociopath. 100%. Not just because he's like huge in business, but like at the end, why did he do that to Rene Russo? He made her think that he left and didn't believe her, that she loved him and it was all about him. And he made her think that it was all about the painting and the case. And then when he was planning to go with her all along anyway, that's some red flag shit.
He's making the argument. I mean, it's a movie, but he's making the argument. Right. I think like I had to know you were interested in me, not just the painting.
Which is like, bitch, you prove it to me.
Well, I think that's what they were both saying, right? Like that was his scheme, is like I can prove it to both of us by doing this.
It's just convenient that one of the machinations causes Rene Russo to cry, where the other
counterpoint. I mean, you're right about that, but counterpoint. He's the only one that took a legal risk. She never had to take a legal risk. He prevented her from having to do that.
He's also the only
That's
one
true
doing
too.
Crimes,
100%
necessitates 100%.
Legal risk. A crime
risk,
is what brought the question of the movie on. But if it's about...
True. And we're fine.
If it's about answering that question, though.
Audiences are fine. Yeah. Let's just get that out, air that out. We're not saying
we're fine with crimes. That's not the issue. No, I mean, of course, as we already said, like I think the broad strokes here is McTiernan is trying to soften the blow of Thomas Crown and his decisions enough that we are rooting for them to be together and like it.
We're like, oh, that's nice.
And I did. I mean, I like the ending of this movie.
Oh, that's nice. How do you end it? It should end on a happy note. It's about love.
And I liked her sort of yelp at, even the way that the yelp happens at the end, where she screams and the flight attendant comes in like, oh no, what's this? And then like gives us this like, oh,
and then she goes like, that's what love looks like. Two rich people on a plane.
Well,
fucking. No, I mean that. Look, I'm gonna be the first to say it. That flight attendant, straight up pervert.
Oh, she's a pervert.
And I'm here.
No doubt.
I'm here for it. Yeah, she's into this shit. She's just watching. Cuts to Thomas Crown affair credits. She's still watching.
And if only we could all be her.
These weird exhibitionists. This is not me reading into it. This
you're
is not
right,
what I
though.
want to do. This is just a character.
He has somebody else in his row. Like there's other people immediately next to them.
Oh yeah.
Just thinking about that in the COVID era, like my God, what a nightmare.
My God.
Anyway, I just want to brief notes about Thomas Crown Affair's impact, and I'll wrap us out here. So it wasn't like a massive hit or anything, but I like sort of like this revisit of it really, to me, highlights the talent and creativity that John McTiernan almost invisibly brings to this film. Because again, a subtler filmmaker, like for instance, Steven Soderbergh, probably would have made a far less approachable film. It would have been a lot more schmaltzy and clever, and I don't think that would have made it good. And
it's also like the house that Die Hard built.
Right. Like, this is.
He is interested in stories that are just like, but let's move. Let's have someone knock on the door.
I think
something
that he got through, he sort of moved past the premise here of like rich guy does rich caper and investigator goes after him into, okay, but sure. But they're two people and they fall in love. What's that like? Like given their situation, like what would that love be like? And I think he does meaningfully explore that. I think the emotions of that are really well rendered, and it's because his sensibility made it possible for us to get that close to them, instead of to admire them like the cast members of Entourage or whatever. A show I keep lampooning because it's not the same tone, obviously, but because that's such a celebrity worship show.
It's rich. Right. It's rich propaganda.
Exactly. So, just a couple other notes, like McTiernan's authenticity, a thing you identified earlier. It also shined through in the making of in a couple fun ways. One is he wanted to shoot the art heist stuff on location. He asked the museum.
That's what
he wanted to do. Yeah, did he asked him. He asked him, and the museum's like, "No, we're not going to let you do that." So you had to build it.
Yeah. No museum's going to be like, this art, you are justified in looking at all these masters.
I just think it's
history. John McTiernan,
so fascinating that a guy who, first of all, wants to work in a mid-level, a mid-range lens, wants to work in a space he can't control. You know, like that just says something about who he is. I think he likes working in real spaces, and I think that's really cool.
Absolutely, I think he thinks it's more. I think he thinks it's a part of the filmmaking process. You hear him talk, and he's like, when you are limited by your solutions, that's when good stuff starts
that's
happening,
an artificial limit because he had the money and resources to build it, which he did. But he wanted to make it harder.
That's a trick. Make artificial limits for yourself.
I think you're right. I think that's a perfect summary of what he's trying to do here. I also think that he wants to make his films as personal as he can, and just like some ways he did that. Some of the real estate in this was his, like his own house and stuff. Like he has a ranch. He had a ranch and they used it. Really? There was a vehicle in this movie that he loaned to the film, and I think just.
So rich people
shit, but also it doesn't have to be his stuff. You know, like I think it's about. That makes it about emotionally connecting to it, for better for worse. And I would also argue, like for instance, you and I both remember the film that I worked on in 2010, where I was working with a director. I was an AD, and the director of that film asked me many times to use my car in the film, which we did. His car never made an appearance, just to give you a contrast. So I think that's
right. Yeah, it's a little different. One's asking for, can you make this easier on me? Another is like, I don't have to do this, but I'm making a choice because I want to get involved in this picture. That
makes it personal
to me.
Exactly.
Like you're saying.
And I think the fact that he's more interested in the love story than the heist is very telling. Like, he's not really that interested in the investigation of it all, you know?
That's the one thing that I'm like, I think that's all really it means when we say that this is his kind of like artistic swan song, is that he's doing that for the first time.
A little bit, yeah.
I think that's, in a way, this is his first like a little less transparent film in that regard, because the very setup for the premise of what his intrigue is for the story comes from a place where it's not like, what is more interesting?
Right.
A love story or a heist? 90% of people are going to probably say, well, heist, probably. And he knew this. He made Die Hard. He made Predator. All of his films kind of come with this pedigree of, I'm going to choose the most interesting visual adventure. And in this one, he's like, no, I want to choose a more humble film and something that's more true to just person-to-person politics. And that is slightly different for John McTiernan. I mean, he always, like you said, throughout his pedigree, kind of wanted to talk about some of this stuff, included scenes and even Die Hard, where it's like, well, yeah, what's going on with Holly, you know? But at the same time, he clearly in this film is not going the heist route.
That's right. And which means he's subverting, I think, the expectations that everybody not associated with the film would have of him. Right. And I respect that he
probably.
Of course he should. I think a great filmmaker should get a kick out of that. And like, just my last point about his authenticity, this movie's still fun. It's fun.
It's
fun. It's a fun movie.
It is,
and it didn't have to be.
Which is surprising, because Act 2, I think we talked about, is just sex. It's just
pretty much just sex.
It's just let's see a honeymoon, and it's like, rich people shit, but it's not like it's just they're hanging out on beaches and fucking, like doesn't seem like that would capture your attention for longer than 10
Especially
minutes, right?
considering
and the movie
it's not
finds a way.
very bombastic. Like, it's not like, and then they're in Dubai. Here's a cool shot of the Dubai towers, like.
Right, it's not 50 Shades of Grey or some shit.
It willfully obscures the bombast, even of their island getaway. It's like, you get a landscape shot and then you're, at this little bungalow that.
We're here. We proved it. We don't need to show the house.
I think it tells you that McTiernan is excellent with tone. Like, he really does understand tone of a film, even if it's not the tone that we expect from him. He's really good at it, and that's what makes things like this movie stand up alongside the great, high five of Predator. You know what I mean? Or the everyman Bruce Willis phone call. To Carl Winslow in Die Hard. You know what I mean? Like, he just knows how to hit those moments. He's so good at it. He is a great filmmaker. It's a shame that he fizzled out so soon. I'd like to see more from him, but that's not how it always goes.
I think that's fine way for directors to go.
If it's not me.
You have a few, you try to get some more money if you can, if you're a success, and then you go to jail because you're spending outpaced.
Well, he went to jail because he was literally spying on his producer with like a. Yeah,
that's true.
Pretty gnarly.
But the motivation is always money.
Yeah, of course.
It's always money.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying. Money over everything.
Money or death.
Quote. It's not as applicable. Yeah, dude. Yeah, and I think that's why McTiernan. I mean, there's two things happening: what he wants and him as an artist.
Absolutely.
He really is good about examining, and I've started to think about this a lot as I've been getting older. When you examine a movie or examine what a movie could be.
Yeah.
Like if you're not the director. There's this fight that happens in every brain of every person, every reader, every viewer, or every collaborator, which is how good is this movie at doing what it's trying to do versus what I want it to do. And he's so very good at making sure that those things align. Yeah,
that's the key.
Finds a reason that he's engaged with the source material in a way that we all can be engaged. And so tonally, the topics he chooses, where we are saying that this is a digression from that. In fact, in some regards, it's a bold-faced like denial of the fact that he did this throughout his career. Not in a bad way, not in him like distastefully saying I hated Die Hard. He's not doing any of that shit. He's just saying, look, what your expectations of this movie. I'm going to do something different that I like, but I'm still going to make it in a way that you will find a reason to.
I'm going to make it and that is accessible to you. Yeah.
And that is the mark to me of a true artist.
Certainly, it's the mark of a person who understands the business he's in.
It's true. It could be a business front thing, but I think it's deeper than that.
I think it is too. It's hard to do that on purpose.
It's hard. Yeah.
He does it,
I think,
effortlessly.
Whereas, George Lucas created an accidental masterpiece and found his way into a Star Wars. And all of the reasons that Star Wars is good is still his. He didn't understand these machinations like McTiernan
He didn't understand them long enough to repeat it, at least.
That's exactly right. And the proof is in the execution.
Yeah. I mean, although you want to hear something terrible, I've heard just a casual survey, like 8 or 9 friends or like younger people that I've met who just recently watched Star Wars, take a wild guess what their favorite Star Wars movie is when they didn't grow up with them. I've heard this like 10 times. Take a wild guess.
Of the original
of
or like
Star
are
Wars,
including
all Star Wars films?
Revenge of the Sith.
No, sir. It is Phantom Menace. I hear that all the time.
What?
Yep.
It's like the exact wrong one.
I know.
Why?
I know. I don't know.
Because it's fun.
It's got
pod racing?
It's a fun cartoon.
It's got pod racing.
Yeah, pod racing's...
And Sebulba's in that one. I forgot that Sebulba's in Phantom Menace. That means it's top 2. That means it's top 2. Sebulba. I thought he was in Revenge.
I would do an impression right now if it wasn't horrible.
The best Star Wars.
Every impression would be... Also, it has Watto, that racist character. Like,
yeah, who also speaks like he sounds like a fucking Watto. Yeah. I know that sounds racist. It probably is, but I just calls him.
He calls it like he sees.
I don't know.
Phantom Menace is a nightmare. We're gonna have to cover that someday on DPT. I think. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
What if I made a treatise on those fucking robots that all make jokes? Those little matchstick men robots that all make stupid ass jokes.
It would be deafening by the sound of the silence of no one caring.
No, you would love that shit. Don't tell me you wouldn't love it.
I would be cackling.
Yeah, you'd love it.
I would be cackling like Pierce Brosnan over here.
I'm gonna watch him. I'm gonna watch Phantom Menace again.
I'm gonna watch it again. Let's fucking.
I'm gonna watch it. God.
Let's do those. What were they called? Star Wars, the Sebulba movies. Let's do the Sebulba movies.
Sebulba.
God,
what a horrible!
I love Sebulba. I love him so much. I love his little feet.
He has like feet arms, right? He has like feet arms.
He walks around with his hands.
Right, he walks in his hands.
He's got big long hands.
But they like,
and he's got little T-Rex feet.
But it doesn't make sense. It's not like it's not like
it's opposite T-Rex.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It's opposite T-Rex. And guess what he does?
He's great at pod racing. He's so good at it. He's got a big engine. A jerk. Big pod race.
He's got a big engine and he's a jerk.
He's not very nice.
God, I love him.
He's not very nice. Yeah, I was kind of rooting for him. Sneaky rooting for him.
I'm going to take a BuzzFeed quiz right now and hope I get Sebulba. You know what I mean?
Which opposite T-Rex are you? Hopefully it's Sebulba.
Which Star Wars character are you? Sebulba. And then I just nod, close my eyes, and fall asleep.
My God, we were talking about Thomas Crown Affair and like mature relationships, and here we are, pod racing.
It's almost like we shouldn't talk about all the bullshit that we talk about. It's
almost like
that we find interesting. Yeah. It's like we should just give them what we want, which is
right. We failed to McTiernan.
I don't even know if they want this. What am I talking about?
We failed to McTiernan in this episode. We failed to McTiernan.
Maybe people are like, turn this shit off immediately. They start
I don't know.
About Star Wars.
I mean, if you listened all the way to the end and you enjoyed the pod race portion of it, please tweet us hashtag Sebulba forever. So that we know you loved hearing about pod racing and also potentially our episode 1 episode.
Make a tiny feet fist and pump it in the air with your tiny legs. Sebulba forever.
God, I need to get that.
That was
I need to hear that voice again. Thank you. Yeah, I when I watched this movie in the theater, I really liked it. And I know, like, I walked out and everyone was like, "eh," and I was kind of surprised by that. I still kind of really like this movie.
It's sometimes they get you.
Yeah,
when
I liked
they want to have fun, and it's like like I don't know. Anytime a filmmaker is like, here's fun and games, like. To me, anybody on the planet, that could be absolutely your shit.
Yeah.
You know, because it's all it is it's one way. It's just saying, this is fun. And if you're into it, fucking awesome.
I also, I know you're going to think this is insane and you're going to think I have bad taste, and I'm just going to say it. I like the song that's like the theme of this movie, except for I don't like the singing in it, but I do like the clapping and piano. I like it. I like the music.
Dun, dun, dun,
yeah, the clap. I love that shit.
Clap, clap.
I love it.
I like that. I think that feels like score. Yeah. I posted it on Twitter. There is a song, which if you look at my Twitter, at Abe the Mighty.
Nice plug.
I should have a post where you can listen to, there is a score to specifically there's a heist sequence that I swear to God is like the most, it's like he just downloaded it from a, like, what is the name of the guy? Kevin McLeod, the guy who does like, I just churn out these Apple loops.
It does feel a little like Apple loopy for sure.
Just like put it on an archive online and someone can download it royalty free. It literally is like a rock song that sounds like that. And it's like, I find it kind of cringeworthy. Not a lot is cringe to me, but that shit, when I hear it, I go like, ooh, this is bad.
There's a boomer
saying, yeah.
There's parts of the soundtrack that are bad for sure.
Yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah, for sure. But
the theme is cool. You can love the theme.
And I like the dumb everybody in bowler hats and briefcases ending. That's very dumb. It's like that's where we are no longer in anything resembling our world at all. But I like it. I like that dumb shit. That's my pod racing.
It's got an artistic vibe, so it's like,
yeah.
Like
there's like a painting.
He's using paintings to get
art
away.
Power. To me, Abe, that Abe is pod racing. That's pod racing to me.
That is pod racing, and that's an episode.
Yeah, it really
Thank
is.
you so much for hanging out with us.
And if you want to come over to my Twitter at @TheRealGans, you'll mostly see me trolling Abe and maybe Dave. That's mostly what you'll see.
Nice plug, man.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!